1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 21. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 7, Siut to Denderah, Part 3. Without, all was sunshine and splendor. Within, all was silence and mystery. A heavy, death-like smell, as of long-imprisoned gases, met us on the threshold. By the half-light that strayed in through the portico, we could see vague outlines of a forest of giant columns rising out of the gloom below and vanishing into the gloom above. Beyond these again appeared shadowy vistas of successive halls leading away into depths of impenetrable darkness. It required no great courage to go down those stairs and explore those depths with a party of fellow travelers, but it would have been a gruesome place to venture into alone. Seen from within, the portico shows as a vast hall, 50 feet in height and supported on 24 Hathor-headed columns. 6 of these, being engaged in the screen, form part of the facade, and are the same upon which we have been looking from without. By degrees, as our eyes become used to the twilight, we see here and there a capital which still preserves the vague likeness of a gigantic female face, while dimly visible on every wall, pillar, and doorway, a multitude of fantastic forms, hawk-headed, ibis-headed, cow-headed, mitred, plumed, holding aloft strange emblems, seated on thrones, performing mysterious rites, seem to emerge from their places like things of life. Looking up to the ceiling, now smoke-blackened and defaced, we discover elaborate paintings of scarabaei, winged globes, and zodiacal emblems divided by borders of intricate Greek patterns, the prevailing colors of which are verdite and chocolate. Bands of hieroglyphic inscription, of royal ovals, of Hathor heads, of mitred hawks, of lion-headed chimeras, of divinities and kings in bas-relief, cover the shafts of the great columns from top to bottom, and even here every accessible face, however small, has been laboriously mutilated. Bewildered at first sight of these profuse and mysterious decorations, we wander round and around, going on from the first hall to the second, from the second to the third, and plunging into deeper darkness at every step. We have been reading about these gods and emblems for weeks past. We have studied the plan of the temple beforehand, yet now that we are actually here, our book knowledge goes for nothing, and we feel as hopelessly ignorant as if we had been suddenly landed in a new world. Not till we have got over this first feeling of confusion, not till, resting a while on the base of one of the columns, we again open out the plan of the building, do we begin to realize the purport of the sculptures by which we are surrounded. The ceremonial of Egyptian worship was essentially processional. Herein we have the central idea of every temple, and the key to its construction. It was bound to contain store chambers in which were kept vestments, instruments, divine emblems, and the like, laboratories for the preparation of perfumes and unguents, treasures for the safe custody of holy vessels and precious offerings, chambers for the reception and purification of tribute in kind, halls for the assembling and marshalling of priests and functionaries, and for processional purposes, corridors, staircases, courtyards, cloisters, and vast enclosures planted with avenues of trees and surrounded by walls which hedged in with inviolable secrecy the solemn rites of the priesthood. In this plan, it will be seen, there is no provision made for anything in the form of public worship. But then an Egyptian temple was not a place for public worship. It was a treasure house, a sacristy, a royal oratory, a place of preparation, of consecration, of sacerdotal privacy. There in costly shrines dwelt the divine images. There they were robed and unrobed, perfumed with incense, visited and worshipped by the king. On certain great days of the calendar, as on the occasion of the festival of the New Year, or the panegyrics of the local gods, These images were brought out, paraded along the corridors of the temple, carried round the roof, and borne with waving of banners and chanting of hymns and burning of incense through the sacred groves of the enclosure. Probably none were admitted to these ceremonies save persons of royal or priestly birth. To the rest of the community all that took place within those massy walls was enveloped in mystery. It may be questioned, indeed, whether the great mass of people had any kind of personal religion. They may not have been rigidly excluded from the temple precincts, but they seem to have been allowed no participation in the worship of the gods. If now and then, on high festival days, they beheld the sacred bark of the deity carried in procession round the temenos, or caught a glimpse of moving figures and glittering ensigns in the pillared dusk of the hypostyle hall, it was all they ever beheld of the solemn services of their church. The temple of Denderah consists of a portico, a hall of entrance, a hall of assembly, a third hall which may be called the hall of the sacred boats, one small ground-floor chapel, and upwards of 20 side chambers of various sizes, most of which are totally dark. Each one of these halls and chambers bears the sculptured record of its use. Hundreds of tableaux in bas-relief, thousands of elaborate hieroglyphic inscriptions cover every foot of available space on wall and ceiling and soffit, on doorway and column, and on the lining slabs of passages and staircases. These precious texts contain, amid much that is mystical and tedious, an extraordinary wealth of indirect history. Here we find programs of ceremonial observances, numberless legends of the gods, chronologies of kings with their various titles, registers of weights and measures, catalogues of offerings, recipes for the preparation of oils and essences, records of repairs and restorations done to the temple, geographical lists of cities and provinces, inventories of treasure, and the like. The hall of assembly contains a calendar of festivals, and sets forth with studied precision the rites to be performed on each recurring anniversary. On the ceiling of the portico we find an astronomical zodiac. On the walls of a small temple on the rood, the whole history of the resurrection of Osiris, together with the order of prayer for the 12 hours of the night, and a calendar of the festivals of Osiris in all the principal cities of Upper and Lower Egypt. 70 years ago these inscriptions were the puzzle and despair of the learned, but since modern science has plucked out the heart of its mystery, the whole temple lies before us an open volume filled to overflowing with strange and quaint and heterogeneous matter, a Talmud in sculptured stone. Given such help as Marryatt's Handbook affords, one can trace out most of these curious things, and identify the uses of every hall and chamber throughout the building. The king, in the double character of Pharaoh and high priest, is the hero of every sculptured scene. Wearing sometimes the truncated crown of Lower Egypt, sometimes the helmet crown of Upper Egypt, and sometimes the shent, which is a combination of both, he figures in every tableau and heads every procession. Beginning with the sculptures of the portico, we see him arrive, preceded by his 5 royal standards. He wears his long robe, his sandals are on his feet, he carries his staff in his hand. 2 goddesses receive him at the door and conduct him into the presence of Thoth, the ibis-headed, and Horus, the hawk-headed, who pour upon him a double stream of the waters of life. Thus purified, he is crowned by the goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, and by them consigned to the local deities of Thebes and Heliopolis, who usher him into the supreme presence of Hathor. He then presents various offerings and recites certain prayers, whereupon the goddess promises him length of days, everlasting renown, and other good things. We next see him, always with the same smile and always in the same attitude, doing homage to Osiris, to Horus, and other divinities. He presents them with flowers, wine, bread, incense, while they in return promise him life, joy, abundant harvests, victory, and the love of his people. These pretty speeches Chefs-d'oeuvre of diplomatic style and models of elegant flattery are repeated over and over again in scores of hieroglyphic groups. Mariette, however, sees in them something more than the language of the court grafted upon the language of the hierarchy. He detects the language of the schools, and discovers in the utterances here ascribed to the king and the gods a reflection of that contemporary worship of the beautiful, the good, and the true, which characterized the teaching of the Alexandrian Museum. Passing on from the portico to the hall of assembly, we enter a region of still dimmer twilight, beyond which all is dark. In the side chambers, where the heat is intense and the atmosphere stifling, we can see only by the help of lighted candles. These rooms are about 20 feet in length, separate like prison cells, and perfectly dark. The sculptures which cover the walls are, however, as numerous as those in the outer halls, and indicate in each instance the purpose for which the room was designed. Thus in the laboratories we find bas-reliefs of flasks and vases, and figures carrying perfume bottles of the familiar Arebalos form. In the tribute chambers offerings of lotus lilies, wheat sheaves, maize, grapes, and pomegranates. In the oratories of Isis, Amen, and Sekhet, representations of these divinities enthroned and receiving the homage of the king, while in the treasury both king and queen appear laden with precious gifts of caskets, necklaces, pectoral ornaments, sistrums, and the like. It would seem that the image breakers had no time to spare for these dark cells, for here the faces and figures are unmutilated, and in some places even the original coloring remains in excellent preservation. The complexion of the goddesses, for instance, is painted of a light buff. The king's skin is dark red, that of Amen is blue. Isis wears a rich robe of the well-known Indian pine pattern. Sekhet figures in a many-colored garment curiously diapered. Amen is clad in red and green chain armor. The skirts of the goddesses are inconceivably scant, but they are rich in jewelry, and their headdresses, necklaces, and bracelets are full of minute and interesting detail. In one of the 4 oratories dedicated to Sekhet, the king is depicted in the act of offering a pectoral ornament of so rich and elegant a design that, had there been time and daylight, the writer would fain have copied it. In the center of the room at the extreme end of the temple, exactly opposite the main entrance, lies the oratory of Hathor. This dark chamber, into which no ray of daylight has ever penetrated, contains the sacred niche, the Holy of Holies, in which was kept the great golden sistrum of the goddess. The king alone was privileged to take out that mysterious emblem. Having done so, he enclosed it in a costly shrine, covered it with a thick veil, and placed it in one of the sacred boats of which we find elaborate representations sculptured on the walls of the hall in which they were kept. These boats, which were constructed of cedar wood, gold, and silver, were intended to be hoisted on wrought poles, and so carried in procession on the shoulders of the priests. The niche is still there, a mere hole in the wall some 3 feet square and about 8 feet from the ground. Thus, candle in hand, we make the circuit of these outer chambers. In each doorway, besides the place cut out for the bolt, we find a circular hole drilled above and a quadrant-shaped hollow below, where once upon a time the pivot of the door turned in its socket. The paved floors, torn up by treasure-seekers, are full of treacherous holes and blocks of broken stone. The ceilings are very lofty. In the corridors a dim twilight reigns, but all is pitch dark beyond these gloomy thresholds. Hurrying along by the light of a few flaring candles, one cannot but feel oppressed by the strangeness and awfulness of the place. We speak with bated breath, and even our chattering Arabs for once are silent. The very air tastes as if it had been imprisoned here for centuries. Finally, we take the staircase on the northern side of the temple, in order to go up to the roof. Nothing that we have yet seen surprises and delights us so much, I think, as this staircase. We had hitherto been tracing in their order all the preparations for a great religious ceremony. We have seen the king enter the temple, undergo the symbolical purification, receive the twofold crown, and say his prayers to each divinity in turn. We have followed him into the laboratories, the oratories, and the Holy of Holies. All that he has yet done, however, is preliminary. The procession is yet to come, and here we have it. Here, sculptured on the walls of this dark staircase, the crowning ceremony of Egyptian worship is brought before our eyes in all its details. Here, one by one, we have the standard-bearers, the hierophants with the offerings, the priests, the whole long, wonderful procession, with the king marching at its head. Fresh and uninjured as if they had but just left the hand of the sculptor, these figures, each in his habit as he lived, each with his foot upon the step, mount with us as we mount, and go beside us all the way. Their attitudes are so natural, their forms so roundly cut, that one could almost fancy them in motion as the lights flicker by. Surely there must be some one weird night in the year when they step out from their places and take up the next verse of their chanted hymn, and, to the sound of instruments long mute and songs long silent, pace the moonlit roof in ghastly order. The sun is already down, and the crimson light has faded, when at length we emerge upon that vast terrace. The roofing stones are gigantic, striding to and fro over some of the biggest. Our idle man finds several that measure 7 paces in length by 4 in breadth. In yonder distant corner, like a little stone lodge in a vast courtyard, stands a small temple supported on Hathor-headed columns, while at the eastern end, forming a second and loftier stage, rises the roof of the portico. Meanwhile the afterglow is fading. The mountains are yet clothed in an atmosphere of tender half-light, but mysterious shadows are fast creeping over the plain, and the mounds of the ancient city lie at our feet, confused and tumbled, like the waves of a dark sea. How high it is here, how lonely, how silent! Hark that thin plaintive cry, it is the wail of a night-wandering jackal. See how dark it is yonder in the direction of the river. Quick, quick, we have lingered too long, we must be gone at once, for we are already benighted. We ought to have gone down by way of the opposite staircase, which is lined with sculptures of the descending procession, and out through the temple, but there is no time to do anything but scramble down by a breach in the wall, at a point where the mounds yet lie heaped against the south side of the building. And now the dusk steals on so rapidly that before we reach the bottom we can hardly see where to tread. The huge side wall of the portico seems to tower above us to the very heavens. We catch a glimpse of 2 colossal figures, one lion-headed and the other headless, sitting outside with their backs to the temple. Then, making with all speed for the open plain, we clamber over scattered blocks and among shapeless mounds. Presently night overtakes us. The mountains disappear, the temple is blotted out, and we have only the faint starlight to guide us. We stumble on, however, keeping all close together, firing a gun every now and then in the hope of being heard by those in the boats, and as thoroughly and undeniably lost as the babes in the wood. At last, just as some are beginning to knock up, and all to despair, Ptolemy fires his last cartridge. An answering shot replies from near by, a wandering light appears in the distance, and presently a whole bevy of dancing lanterns and friendly brown faces comes gleaming out from among a plantation of sugar canes to welcome and guide us home. Dear, sturdy, faithful little Rais Hassan, honest Khalifa, laughing Salome, gentle Mehemet Ali, and Musa, black but comely, they were all there. What a shaking of hands there was, what a gleaming of white teeth, what a shower of mutually unintelligible congratulations! For my own part, I may say with truth that I was never much more rejoiced at a meeting in my life. End of section 21.